Shayna, it is so great to have you in this series. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
I'm really, really glad. And there's been a lot of wisdom being shared during these interviews with Learn to Listen. And already I'm just enamored with the wisdom that you have and how God has been just downloading a lot of incredible things to you and through you. So I'm very excited for you to even give a little bit of background about yourself and share, your history and dance and where you are now and all of that. So thank you again for being here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It really is an honor. When you asked me, I got really excited and somewhat nervous because the people that you've had on here have been just giants, and I'm like, okay, here I go.
You
But no,
are a giant. You are a giant.
but yeah, I mean, I actually started my journey of being a dancer as a gymnast, and I was training so many hours, and I became an optional gymnast, and they were like, "Hey, you need to take ballet for you to get better at your floor routines and your beam routines." And I was like, "Okay." So I think that was their mistake because I took my first ballet class and fell in love with it, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm done. I want to do this." Right? And so yeah, I quit gymnastics and never looked back, and just became in love with movement and what that brought to my soul as a dancer. But yeah, and then my background a little bit is just I backup dance for couple Christian artists, and I went to Christ the Nations College in Dallas, and I started the first hip hop team there. um, and yeah, and then I met my husband at we were a big DJ actually from New York. DJ Kubert came into town, into Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he was like, "Hey, if you are a breakdancer or a B-girl, you can get in for free because we need you to come do the show." And I was like, "Yes." And so I took my very little knowledge of breakdancing and got into that show. And my husband and I met my husband there at that show because he was a breakdancer. And we just realized that we had so much in common with our love for where we wanted to see God take dance. And because we had both been kind of in the professional world, and we were just like, what does this look like if we take what we've learned from the professional world and then mix it with our passion to see where God wants to lead this. And so we birthed out in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We birthed what was called the Legacy Project, and it started off as a studio. And then we realized that a lot of artists leave the Midwest to go to East Coast or West Coast. And so we were like, what would it look like if we start a company here that could keep artists here within Tulsa? So we started one of the first urban professional companies in the area. And we had breakdancers mixed with ballerinas. And it was such an amazing experience. We did all of these shows. We were literally living our dream. And then, and then there began a stirring. And, where you're like, I don't know if I want to listen to that stirring. And we the next 2 years we just were like, God, where are you taking us? Because we feel like there's something more. And my husband likes to tell people that the saying that we got was, in order for you to get more, you have to become more. And so we knew that we needed to go to a place that where we could get more training or connections or with God, not necessarily in dance, but connections with people that were in love with God and were headed somewhere in that sense. And so we prayed about it, and we found ourselves now in Redding, California. And we are attached to Bethel Church. I currently work with BCA, which is Bethel Conservatory of the Arts, in their dance department. And then I just here to serve that community. So we've just been sometimes you'll see us in the worship side, and then sometimes you'll see us even in we did just recently a Black History Month, and they asked us if we could piece a dance piece together. So it's just been really interesting and different, but I absolutely love where we are now, because it's not just even the church, but even the landscape. I mean, I have mountains, and it's amazing in Northern California. I'm in love. So yeah.
That's beautiful. So what I heard from the first part of it was from ballet to breakdance.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant. You don't hear many of those stories. You do sometimes, but sometimes you think it's got to only be an act of God to do that.
Yeah.
Because most of the time people like to stay in their genre.
Same thing. Yeah. I'm learning that. I was actually listening to uh, Erwin McManus, the pastor for Mosaic Church in LA, and he had his son recently do like a talk with him and his daughter. So it was like brother and sister talk. And he said, I realized that I have more dreams than I do thoughts. And it really hit me and it resonated. I was like, that's it. Like, I feel like sometimes I have more dreams than I do thoughts. So I tend to kind of jump around. So yeah.
Well, I think that's going with the flow of the Spirit. And you already alluded to this first question that I like to ask in regards to listening, and how you said, you started to know that there was some kind of stirring, a little unction, little something happening, and you were like, oh, I don't know if I want to listen or not, but chose to put your ear to the heart of the Lord. And so I'd love to hear about your experiences in particular. And you've talked about with your husband, and so there's a communion there in particular. He's a dancer. But how do you listen? And that can be, to your own body, right? It can be just to the thoughts or the Spirit of the Lord. So I'd love for you to share about that aspect.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting in this specific timeline that we're in right now, with Corona and COVID and that happening. I laugh because you have pretty much two choices: either to learn to listen or go crazy, or maybe a little bit of both, because it's just this halting that just happened. So I think it's been really amazing. The one thing that I have found, especially being a feeler, I've learned that I can, like, especially going into classes and teaching dance, that I can, like, I'll walk into a room and I can instantly be like, oh, this is, I can feel what people are bringing or not bringing. And so I've learned that listening is so crucial for me, listening and figuring out how to hear God's voice, very strong for me, or else, being swayed by emotion. And I think artists can kind of relate to that as well, is that we have to find that anchor. And I think for me, that's definitely God's voice, and it's been in my life. He has, and I'm going to warn everybody, I will probably cry like 12 times when I talk about God and God's love, but he has done so much for my life, and I wouldn't be who I am today if he wouldn't have intervened in several big ways. And so I think to myself, like, as just as an anchor, like, his love, he wants to give us the best, and he wants to see us succeed and be profitable. And I feel like listening to his voice is really important. But there's a couple things that I have found, just even in the scientific aspect, there's two ways that we hear. Obviously, one through our eardrums, but then two, we also hear through the vibrations through our bones. And so I think that's really interesting for me, because sometimes I think artists, we hear like hearing and we think, oh, I've got to listen this specific way. I've got to hear this audible thing. And I feel like God created the hearing through your bones for artists, you know what I mean? Because we can listen to music, we could watch a movie, we can be around conversation with artists, and we can hear from God, because like that can be absorbed into us. And I think that that's what has been incredible for me, because especially coming to Northern California, I've experienced even listening to God's voice as you might be more clear when I'm walking outside in his nature and hearing and seeing what he's done and created. And I think it's been a really cool journey. Sometimes it's been even hard, I guess, to hear what he has to say, and to and just trust and completely trust that he has the best for us. But every single time that we have listened to him and just said, okay, here we go, it's been incredible. And he's always met us almost into another level, if I could say that. So yeah, I just think it's especially in this time, I'm super excited, because I feel like artists are getting the opportunity to be able to just chill and be able to listen to their bodies even. I feel like in 2020 as artists, we are, especially dance world, it's so fast paced. And if you don't keep up, then you feel like maybe you don't have a place or a voice. And I feel like God is giving us this time to just chill and to learn to listen, to move with him, because that's going to take us to the next levels. It's going to create art in a different way. And it also makes us be able to listen to, oh my gosh, my body was under a lot of stress. or you know what I mean, like, or I didn't realize maybe I needed to be hydrated more, or maybe I needed to, you know what I mean, like eat healthier because I was always on the run. And so it was just this has been an incredible time right now. So yeah.
I'm totally agreeing with that because I've been able to communicate with lots of friends who are artists and hearing similar things about, there's this discipline to be so driven to do your artistry at a high level. And so that's technique and this pursuit of excellence, which is commendable. And that's, we're giving our all when you're a believer artist or you're not yet in the kingdom. It's just, you're fully in. But there is something about how much of a toll that takes on our bodies and how much of a toll that takes on us emotionally, mentally, spiritually, every way, every alley there is. It's taxing. So the ones that I'm communicating with, that I'm hearing that have, I think, the most wisdom is they've been able to find a contentment in this place and not a complacency or and not a desire that they don't get active and get to do their art later. That's to come. But I just really am appreciating hearing that perspective, that we listen and it's in our body and it's in our bones and it's beyond the cognitive, it's beyond audibly what we're hearing. And I think there's so much more to learn about that. And if people really can dive in to understand that the body's just screaming to hear.
It is. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because, they've even found that recently they have found that sound waves actually can change your DNA. And that has been really big for me because even in this time of stopping, it makes you really evaluate, like, okay, here are these people I'm putting myself around all the time, and really evaluating, saying, okay, like, who's speaking life into my life, who's, you know what I mean? And learning, it's really valuable what even the words that come out of my mouth and how that shapes who I am and my DNA. And so I'm a real big advocate. My mom probably will be, I finally did something right. Cause she used to get onto us all the time about, like, we would say, something like, oh, I feel like I'm getting sick. My mom would say, stop saying that, and, but it really, now that, like, I've gotten into the kind of science side of things, it's really, like, it's been proven that the words that come out of your mouth and what the sounds that you absorb through your bones literally change your DNA. And so I think that should inspire us, especially as artists, that we even speak to ourselves on a regular basis. Like, I know that a lot of artists deal with low self-esteem. I know that they always feel kind of inadequate. That's constantly, we're always comparing and judging. And I feel like we're really at a time where we can reset all of that, because we have a time to step away and say, how do I want, or who do I want to become outside of all of this when it gets back into the new norm, or whatever they want to call it. But when things start to go back to creating, who do you want to become in all of this? And I think we can do that by shaping our words and what we absorb through sound as well. So super excited.
Yeah, so much power. And I keep reading, listening, and learning more about that aspect as well, that it's just goes beyond. I mean, God's word's amazing, and it's so profound and so life-giving, and that's a way. And he, like you mentioned, creation is a way, and from one another, being able to edify, encourage one another. But the words that come from ourself to ourself, even. I have a daughter that's around 7+ months pregnant right now. And for months, I just have been telling her, okay, you speak life to that baby. And so when we're together and we'll say something and we'll have a conversation about, baby's character or what he's going to be. She's like, and she's just speaking over. It's like, and you are a little man of peace, and you are loved, and it's just holding it.
I love that. I have to say, there's something that I discovered actually this week as I was doing some different studies, but this is so for your daughter and I will change it to artists later, maybe in our conversation. But Yeah, so if you study the baby and growing, they actually have it's controversial, the stem cells that exist within inside them, and what's really interesting is these stem cells. It starts with one stem cell, and then they duplicate and they become what they call daughter cells. And these daughter cells literally mimic and are identical to the mother cell. So these cells are literally duplicating. But the interesting thing about stem cells is that they literally are there to be told what to do. And they can become anything that these scientists or doctors are telling them. And so what I find is interesting is that they only find these within embryonic embryos, right? They find like 150 of these cells within the little baby, like even within like just a few days old, and then in the mother's womb. And then they find these cells in the embryonic fluid that the baby's growing in. And then they find these cells within the umbilical cord. And so what I find is interesting is that literally the day when we start studying about Jeremiah, where it says, I knew you before you were formed, and I molded you and shaped you, I feel like, man, I just started crying because I was just like, God was showing me that even as a baby, he's established these cells so that he can speak into them because they're just ready to absorb, right? So he's just ready to speak into these cells and mold them and shape them and create that baby the way that he sees their purpose and their destiny. And he's speaking life. And that's what they're growing into. And I think that is super cool because then also, you've got that original cell, which, in Adam and Eve, you have the original cell that was inside of them, which was the image of God. And then inside that, that's when the duplication process happens. And those daughter cells are literally duplicating the image of God. So when it says that we're created in his image, it literally is scientifically true, which I think is super cool. But then also just kind of what you were saying with your daughter, like, that is such an amazing opportunity to know those stem cells are just filled within your baby that's growing and within the casing, and that what we speak to that baby is literally life. Will literally shape them into what they're going to be in the future and who they're going to become. I don't know. I just got chills when I was researching that. I was just like, come on, God, like you even like prove it when we're babies, and the scriptures that you say align up with what they're finding in science research. And I think that's amazing. So
yeah, this is so many reasons why I love you, but this is just one of them. It's just that understanding of our God and how vast, amazing, grand, awesome, and every minute detail.
yeah.
And it's already all in existence. It's already present in his creative act that has been done and is continuing to be done. We're just figuring it out. And it's so humbling. But it's also when these new scientific discoveries are being made, it's like, yeah, makes sense because that's my God.
We knew that. It's fine.
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So as I know, you are a leader and you're raising up other leaders because of your role in ministry. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this leadership and things that you've learned, ways you've grown, or things that you value and are seeing and are really just kind of trying to, even pull out of others that are going to continue to raise up in leadership roles. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so obviously there's lots of different leaders in leadership roles. So I just kind of can speak from my personal experience, but I think for me, if you read any leadership books, they say, you've got to serve, to become the best leader. And that's great. And I think that's definitely needed. But I think for me, what I have found is learning to do life with people. And I know that sounds like maybe it's a simple kind of quality or simple task, but I actually think it's a lot harder than we think. Because, we read, it's one of the commandments. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so when I take a step back, and this has really been kind of my husband and I's approach to leadership and to how we kind of led even our team back in Tulsa, was is learning like, okay, if I'm supposed to love people like I love myself. And then I take a step back and I start to say, okay, what is it that I find valuable? And I find that my family is valuable and my dreams are valuable, and that I want to be financially blessed, and I want, all these things. And so you start to think like, okay, if that's what's important to me, then I have to love people in those areas. I have to come and walk with them in those areas and be there with them. And in return, you get this beautiful thing, which is friendship. And you get this beautiful opportunity where they value what you have to say in their lives, because they know without a shadow of a doubt that you love them. You love them past what you love yourself. Sometimes there's major sacrifice there. And it's not an easy thing. You know what I mean? It's something that we have found really difficult. But in return, we've seen such beautiful, beautiful things come out of it, because it's like, we've seen people that disagree in every sense, form, or fashion with us, even down to our beliefs in God, be okay and have deep, loving relationships with us because we loved them first. And we got in their lives and said, what can we do? How can we be there? And not just to change them, but to truly just love them and have friendship and fellowship with them. I feel like that's really important as leaders, because I think people are seeking authenticity right now. And the church has this amazing opportunity because of COVID, that it's breaking down maybe the four walls of the church again, and it's breaking down the corporation side of the church, and it's saying, okay, how do we be the church? And I think that's we love people even when they totally disagree with us, and we say, how can we come underneath you? What do you dream about? What do you want to do with your life? And let us help you. And that's been kind of my heart. That's what literally I'm finding is what literally I get excited about in the morning when I wake up and I say like, oh, I have such and such coffee with somebody, and I'm like, okay, I get to ask like, how can I help? How can I help serve? And it's just been a beautiful thing for us. And it's not ideal for a lot of people because it takes a lot of time. And I don't know if it's necessarily the platform for if you're a pastor of, thousands. But for us as artists, I think that the artists are really seeking someone that will just come in alongside them and say, hey, let's climb this mountain of what your dream looks like. And what is, let's dig out the things that, maybe your past has caused, and then welcome them into my house as well. And you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's just a really cool, transition for me, because it's just like, this is who I am. This is real. And I want to do life with you. And I think that's important for me. So, yeah.
A lifestyle leadership, really.
Yeah.
And love leads.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a lot of L's right there. Lifestyle leadership, love leads. Living a lifestyle leadership of love.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think, when we look at, I laugh because I'm definitely not a country girl at all, but I have friends that, that have had sheep and cows, and they spend so much time with them that they're like, oh, that's Maggie May walking up here, and I laugh because I'm like, it's a cow. I don't know how you're telling the difference between that cow and the next, and unless there's something big and drastically different. But those people have spent that much time with those animals, and they know the difference between them, and maybe not anyone else would know. And I think that's the kind of leadership I want to see. I want to be in a room full of artists and say, you know what makes you unique is this. And the reason I know that is because I've spent time with you. I know who you are. So I think it's valuable for me. And so I hope to kind of project that out as well. So, yeah.
And it's just making me think and just tie back into this whole idea of the daughter, the mirroring,
Yes.
just that duplication that, that we are seen by this amazing God and we are known. And so just as you're saying, that a farmer or a person would know their animal and would know their name. And like you as a mom, you hear a child's voice and you know which child that is that's speaking. So there's something about that familiarity. Some people just get to the place of getting caught up to know God, but they've been known by God before they were created.
Yeah.
So I think that's so beautiful in that understanding of being known and loved,
Yeah.
right? Loved
Yeah.
by God and created lovingly with intention and purpose. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hardest thing is to understand that God doesn't have stipulations, and that, I was literally listening to a message this morning about Zacchaeus, and how, people, when Jesus went to eat with him, they were like, oh, he's a sinful man, and God was like, I just want to come to your house. And in that, just by hanging out with him, then there was like, hey, there was a revealing of maybe there's some things that needed to happen in his life. But it wasn't that Jesus put stipulations. He just wanted to hang out.
Yeah.
And I think that that's been really cool for me, is because it's like, man, I think we come at it and with like sometimes as a, let's change these people, or let's maybe go at like, you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z to get to his love. But that's so worldly. And that's the kind of love that we're used to maybe here on earth, but that's not the way that Jesus designed it. And I think so constantly reminding ourselves, hey, like, Jesus doesn't have stipulations, and he just literally wants to be with you. And then I think the more we're with him, then we start to, what you said, duplicate and become like him. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Well, it's also like, and I don't know where this teaching came from other than it's very biblical, but the context of somebody that formulated this concept of behave, believe, belong.
Oh, yeah.
And as we navigate in the church in general, there's this understanding that people out there start behaving a particular way, believe like we believe, and then we'll let you belong to this church culture, church population, or our community. And it's just the other side, other way around. That's basically saying, come, you belong. We belong to God. We don't have any right to not, to disregard everybody. We want to say you belong. And then as you belong, prayerfully, you will start believing and understanding how much you're loved by God, and understanding those truths, and transformation occurs. And then the result is your behaviors change.
Exactly.
And so it's a little bit of a different approach that doesn't put on the same kinds of conditions.
Yeah, I mean, it talks about, there's a scripture that talks about how if we get rid of our unbelief, that God will graft us back into his line, to graft us into his bloodline. And I was talking with my beautiful neighbor the other day, and we were talking about grafting, actually. And she said, yeah, I've grafted a couple of plants, where, the mother plant, and then you graft another plant in and make, one thing, right? And she said, what I find is interesting, and this thought just kind of blew me away, but she said, what I find is interesting is that you have to wound or expose the mother plant in order for you to be able to graft it in. And that hit me, because I was just like, again, thinking about God's love for us, and that, you read about how, Jesus was sent as a man, and so he did everything, as a human. And I thought, man, okay, if he did that, then he also submitted himself into the laws of physics that he's put into place. And so for us to come back and be in alignment with him, then he had to be wounded. He had to be exposed for us to come in and get grafted into him again. But because of that, now, when we believe, we are actually grafted into his bloodline, that we are one with him. So there's no leaving, like there's no leaving him. It's like we are one in the same with him. And I think that's beautiful. And I could get really teary-eyed when I talk about that, because like knowing that he knew he was going to be wounded for us to come back in relationship with him is super cool. So
I love that. And as you were speaking, I just was pulling up this from scriptures that I read this morning in Joshua. It said, afterwards, Joshua read all of the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it was written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and the children and the foreigners who lived among them. And just as you're talking, there's something about this understanding of, there's laws in place and order, and there is speaking this to understanding and, really kind of speaking it into existence in the context of what is the truth and helping us to understand it.
Yeah.
But just the things that you're articulating, it just, that came to mind this morning. It's like, yes, it's got to be spoken. It's got to be understood. And we have to tell that there's real actual principles of how there's consequences, there's blessings and curses.
Yeah.
Because of these truths, these scientific truths, but also these biblical truths, nature, spiritual, just how it weaves together.
All works together. Yeah. And also, that's interesting because going back to the stem cells, they have found that, adults have stem cells that are in their spines. But those stem cells actually can't be used as, because they've lost their power, what you would say, I don't know what you want to call it, but they've lost their ability to transform and be told what to do. And so I think that that's really interesting because as adults, we lose, or we've maybe accepted truths about who we are. And so I think even our body says, this is who I am. And they have the ability to change. It just takes a longer process to get them there, which kind of blows my mind because I'm like, that's so true. If we've believed a lie for this amount of years, or we've believed a truth about ourselves, then our body is literally accepting that as 100% truth. But it's not. And maybe those things we're looking through, tinted glasses in certain areas in our life. But God is literally saying your cells can transform. They can turn back, but it might take a longer process to kind of really fight those thoughts and break those truths that you've believed. And I think that's incredible. I mean, that's why I'm just kind of blown away right now by God, what God's showing me. Because I'm just like, man, God, you have cared about every single detail. And then when you created art as an artist, it had purpose. Like, yes, he created this beauty and this, universe and this world that has so much beauty into it. But everything he created had purpose and it all aligned with each other. And I think that could be really a cool thought to go down as an artist, especially with creating, that maybe not creating just for art, but creating, art from having a purpose aspect of it. So yeah, I don't know, just thoughts.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Well, you're leading right in just to this next whole idea of just how God is moving in the arts. And that can be, the power, authority, and the beauty, the transformation, the healing, everything that the arts has the ability to do. But I'd love to hear from you. How do you feel like God either can use the arts and I know we need like 3 more hours for this conversation.
Yeah.
But just how is God moving today in the arts in and around the world as you see it and experience it?
Yeah. Wow. That's, I know that there's a lot of loss happening right now. I know there's a lot of, just some real sobering experiences that are happening. But I think you have choices, what you focus on. And so, I'm going to, just with me and my family right now, we've chosen to kind of look at the happy moments and the hope. But man, I think I was actually studying the history of art, like actual physical art recently, and going back to the Black Plague that hit our Earth, and it literally said that it took out 1/3 of the generation, or like a population within our world. And out of that came the medieval art, right? And people say the Gothic art or whatever, and it was this dark time. But if you actually study, there was some beautiful things that came out of that. There was like stained glass process came out of that. And out of that, you see, you think stained glass, and most of the time people associate that with the church, right? Like, some big, amazing Catholic church or, that has done big stained glass processes. And what I also think is interesting is that stained glass takes forever to make and do. And I think as I was studying that, I was like, man, like, I don't know, but maybe it was like in this time where there's this moment where artists can breathe and take time to experiment and be able to like create something that is everlasting and that we literally travel to go see that. And then you see like in the next movement of art, you see like people like Michelangelo being birthed and, and Raphael and all of these amazing artists, and they were within the church, and you start to see this amazing art form. And that was also because of, a major shift in government control. So I think you start to see when you study art is that there's this amazing thing that happens out of a movement or out of a major shift in the earth. You start to see kind of art emerge in a different way. That excites me because I know that this is, a major shift that is happening, and it has leveled the arts out in a way that is quite devastating to a lot of people. But out of that, like, and I think about, being in Northern California, the year before we came, we had the car fire that literally just devastated this area. And so we're watching, we can go up to Whiskey Town where a lot of that fire went through, and you're starting to see this, like, the little green start to come out of that desolation, and you're starting to see the rebirth that's happening. And so it's like, yes, that devastated. There was, man, there was death, there was, loss in all of that time. But there also is now this kind of rebirth that's happening, that might actually have been healthy for the land itself. And so what I really see is that, yeah, this is a time where we're going to start to see movements happen because of the time of halt, because of the time of stopping. If we allow ourselves, I know that, when this first happened, we were all laughing about how many Netflix series we could, binge watch and all of that stuff. We were trying to fill because we were so used to going and going and going. But now it's like, as this has progressed, we find ourselves, and when I've talked to other artists, they find themselves being actually okay with this time by ourselves, and we've kind of detoxed. And I love it because I think it's giving us time to actually dream and create things that are not, and don't this I'm going to say this cautiously, because I'm not saying art is the YouTube art or stuff that we're seeing is not like everlasting, but it's just this almost like we create so fast now, and it's like this, I'm going to create, and then it's going to be famous for like 2 days, and I'm going to throw it out, right? Like, and then I'm going to create something in, and it's going to, you know what I mean? And I think we've lost that longevity of art where we make something that impacts not just one generation, but a legacy. Like, that piece of art literally has a legacy to it. So yeah, that's where I think I'm excited about, because I'm hoping what we see is we see these kind of Rembrandt artists coming out that literally can birth projects that they've had to have time to dream about, that they've had to have time to stop and say, what can I create in this time of like nothingness, right? And then see what starts to form and what moves. Because I think we're going to start to see the shaking of what we hold our standards to, right? Like, we've held this what's art standard for this long, so maybe it's time that we start to shift and think creatively and differently of like, let's create something that rocks and impacts this world. So yeah, I get excited. I literally, we could talk about this for hours.
I know. Yeah. Yes. And I'm in agreement with you. And I think through some of those masterpieces that were created in talking about art history, it took them years to create some of those works. And that was a dedication and determination, but they studied, and there's times where you'll see that they've painted over top and then over again and over again, where they've had to get it right. And it wasn't that either instantaneous or even what you're articulating, more of a disposable art that, it's here today and in a couple of days it's lost its, the attention of the viewers. So I appreciate this. And I believe when we are still, be still and know that I'm God, when we have that, either it's imposed upon us or we're wise enough to take the time to quiet, still, then we're able to, see even what are we made of, and what are the possibilities, and who is this creator God. And for those who aren't pursuing a faith endeavor in their life and artistry, you can't help but be influenced in some way by God's magnitude, because he is light, and he is, energy, he is everything. So that is a part of the influence in some way or not, recognizably or not, it is a part. So I'm really appreciating hearing.
Yeah, I think, even when you study within that art world, you get to that enlightenment period, right? That happens. And they're like, we're going to create art now from science and mathematical and practical, the things that we know, and we're not going to do the unknown. And I think that's where you start to see the church, because it's been majorly afraid of science and been majorly afraid of mathematics because of what it might prove or disprove. That it kind of went, okay, I'm going to take away from the arts. I'm going to stop, right? And so then we start to see, I mean, amazing art still being formed, but it was just this like pendulum. Like you go into like the realism, and then, you know, you go into like, you know, the romanticism, and it just literally starts to swing. And then I feel like it's gotten faster and faster the way it's gone. It's like, because now it's like one day we feel emotional and one day we feel sane, and like, you know what I mean? And so then it just keeps on doing this. And I feel like, and I know this is, man, God's been changing my heart so much on dance right now. But I feel like God is saying, we've got to anchor in again. We've got to find that. I think it was you talking about that line the other day, and we find that anchor that creates that straight line and feed into God. And it just has been inspiring me, because I was like, we need that alignment again, so that we can create art, not by emotional state of like how we feel, but because we're connected with Him. We know who we are in Him, how He feels about us. And out of that births movement, births art, because He's an artist. So when we align ourselves with Him, then we create art that, I mean, literally His art is inspiring us to create art, right? So like, that's what it should do. It should, you know, the mountains, we walk in the mountains and we say, oh man, I need to go home and create or paint or do something, because I'm so inspired by the awe of like little bits of color here and there that just randomly popped up. And it's like, you know, how can I form that in a dance, or, you know what I mean? And so I think it's been really cool to say, okay, I'm going to give myself time to say, what is my next step? What is my next, you know, I'm not getting fulfilled anymore giving a 5, 6, 7, 8 every 5 minutes, you know what I mean? And being like, you have to be creative or you won't make money. And shifting that and saying, I don't care about that. I want to make a lifelong lasting impact with my art. And I think that only comes with being connected with God, to be honest with you. So.
That plumb line.
Exactly.
That plumb line. And I appreciate what you're articulating. And it's just like anything in history where there's been a movement, because there's somebody or a community, somehow something, it motivates change.
Yeah.
And it's going to need to be a cultural shift, paradigm shift, because we are so satisfied with the instantaneous art. And so the 15-minute segment or the 2-minute max segment, because our attention span, potentially, hopefully, prayerfully, our attention spans have been able to grow a little bit now over these days. And because of a couple of months, prayerfully, we will, that cultural shift where we were on this trajectory that really, it was on a decline where it kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So anyway, I just think that prayerfully hopefully there'll be enough voices coming together that will be countercultural in the context of, we get our worth and our value by our contributions and our output. And if we can understand there is worth and value by sitting at the throne of Jesus, there's worth and value, and that we're esteeming that, and they are calling that out of people to sit in that place, as opposed to just being massively productive in the output of a creative endeavor. Yeah, it's so much more powerful to be at this other place.
Yeah, and I think there's a more fulfillment as an artist too, because I know that when I'm pushed by a deadline to create art, which is 99% of the time right now, then I'm not as fulfilled with my art, because I'm like, man, I wasn't in that creative atmosphere and literally had to push something out that I might not have created it otherwise. So yeah, I mean, I think if we could shift and teach this next generation, I mean, they say the generation Z or that's coming up after all of us is like has a 1 second longer of an attention span than a goldfish. And that's crazy. When you study marketing, they say you can only do pictures now with 1 or 2 words because they won't absorb anything more than that. And I think that that's got to be a reset. We've got to reset that within the arts because they'll listen to the arts. Like that's their language. So creating masterpieces like, you know, and I know this is funny, but even back in the day, like you see Cats on Broadway being birthed. And I know that's funny, but it's still around and it's still something we see. And now it's a movie, you know what I mean? And, but it came out of a place where someone could sit and dream and create that weird thought about doing a whole Broadway on Cats, you know? And we see that lasting through the ages because it took time and thought and, you know, that aha moment that hits artists. We've got to wait for that aha moment, and that takes time. So I don't know, it's good.
So good. So good. So just in closing, what else would you like to share? Just to encourage, admonish. I know that there's a lot, and I feel like I want to do part 2 and 3 and 4 with you. So we already got something in motion and planning another thing. So I'm so excited about that. But just what else?
Yeah, I feel like if I could say as far as encouraging right now, with identity with an artist, this is where I'm really emotional because it's in my heart. Those that are leaders, especially, and I'm going to speak kind of to the dance world because that's where I'm in, but as leaders in the dance world, as artists, I think that, you know, a lot of our identity is wrapped up in what we produce and how people perceive that, what we produce, and our identity can get lost and in that. And I feel like this is such a time where God is allowing us to reset. And I talk about, you know, going back to authenticity. You know, authenticity, if you look up the word, it says going back to the original design. And if we start thinking about those stem cells and we start thinking about what God had designed for us as artists and as daughters of Him or sons, that He just had this relationship in mind with us. And then that was severed, obviously, or like the authority was severed within the Garden of Eden. And then because He desired that relationship so much that again, you see it being reconnected by being wounded and then coming together. And so just taking this time just as artists to really step back and say, you know what, like I need to reestablish that line. I need to reestablish my relationship and knowing who I am as a daughter or a son, so that I'm creating from the aspect of not just to create, but I'm creating literally from a place of just overflow and excess of who God is and how He sees me. And I think that that's really important as artists, is to get around people right now that are like-minded, if you can't, or if you feel like you're in a bad mindset, to put yourself around people that can believe that way around you. I was talking to an artist recently, and she asked me the question about, you know, we were talking about DNA and changing things and the words that we speak. And she said, what if you don't have the courage to speak those words right now? And I said, put yourself around the people that do, right? Like, you know, get into that relationship that people will speak truth. And for the people that are, you know, that were the heads of our industry, I just really feel like it's time to take a step back and allow yourself to find fulfillment again, and know that if we all come together and we can all shift this and bring a dynamic art, I believe that will shift even nations and cities and the way things are done. And it's time for the artists to step up. And we see that in history. We see that artists were used to build temples, and we see that the artists were used to lead armies. And we see this amazing thing where artists were leaders. And I was watching, and I'm going to laugh, but I was watching John Krasinski's So Good News that he has on. And this is nothing against his wife or anything, but Emily Blunt came on and was interviewing a little girl about watching Mary Poppins that she was in. And she just wanted to meet the guy that created Hamilton. That's all she wanted to do, right? She was like infatuated with him. And she said, she said, you know, he's more of like a backup dancer on this show. You don't really want to meet him. And it hit me with a ton of bricks, because what we have designed for dancers is we've told a lot of these dancers that you've made it when you reach that background status, right? And I'm just like, that is such a lie from the enemy. And that is what I'd like to see shift and break, because you are not designed to be a background dancer. And I'm not saying that that can't happen and you can make influence in that area, but I'm saying you are more than that. You are created to be leaders. You were created to lead armies. You were created to lead nations as an artist, as a dancer. So taking that time and understanding your worth and your value, I think is really important right now, because I think we're going to start to see, even in worship, worship dancers have always been kind of the added to worship, you know, like here's this amazing worship leader with all of its, you know, instruments, and then there's a dancer on the side, you know. But I'd like to say that there is a shift that's happening, that you're going to start to see that worship can be led by any different kind of worship, and you're going to start to see maybe a shift even in the dancing, that they're going to say, holy cow, what they can do with their body, and man, I could get into the science of that, but I won't for time's sake. But what they can do with their body can help project out maybe even more than a song can or a singer can with their body, and changing that energy out. And so hopefully I feel like there could be a real huge, what you said, a paradigm shift that's happening. And so just take that time to allow yourself to align again and find your worth with him, before you start creating again and filling that void with creation instead of filling it with his identity for you. So anyways, that's my thought.
So good, so good. Well, and I think that it just ties us right back towards the beginning of, what are we mirroring? What are we emulating? And we have these ideals that it's the, you know, the culture and the society that's coming from a secular marketplace that's reached the apex, and that's, we're trying to emulate that. And we just have got it wrong. It's really modeling after the creator of all creators, the artist of all artists, and letting that be what we're working in tandem with, whom we're working in tandem with.
And it's not just creating to be like weird or outside the box. I'm not just saying that. Like, I'm not just saying to be weird for weird's sake, but I am saying that because this is a leveling playing, maybe it is time for those that have that connection with the Holy Spirit and with God. Maybe it's time to shift the ruler a little bit, if that makes sense. Like how we measure art. I really feel like that's what needs to shift, like, and say, okay, like, you know, this has been glorified for so long, and now we're finding, you know, that the dance world is getting hit, is one of the hardest artistic endeavors to get hit, because we have to have live audiences. We have to, you know what I mean? We teach classes live, you know what I mean? Like, and when we do videos on YouTube or Amazon, we don't make the money that like an actor would make, because we're just dancers per se. And I think it's time as dancers to take your rightful role. God birthed that inside of us. He designed that from the day you were born, and we now know that he spoke that into existence in our mother's womb. And so that being said, I feel like, I just would like to rally those dancers up and say, when you know who you are, then you will start to see change in your city or in your studio or in your whatever productions that you're doing. You're going to start seeing changes physically, emotionally, because you're going to be connected. And then, just a small little part, I mean, your atoms are filled, when you get down into the core of an atom, are filled with energy waves. And the way you tell your body, like, hey, I want my hand to move, your brain sends an electrical pulse all the way down, obviously, to your hands. What I love is that they say those cells, like, eat that electrical message, and they literally eat it and then spit it out to the next one. So it's like a Pac-Man effect, right? Like what, right? Anyways, so your cells are literally absorbing that message that you're sending to your body. So I think, this is my thought, is that if you are connected, kind of what we were saying with that plumb line, if you're connected with God and you're mirroring him and what he has for you, then you're going to send that message throughout your cells, and those cells are filled with waves of energy. So when we move and when we dance in that alignment, then we are creating a wave of energy that's releasing from our body into the atmosphere, into people's lives that we're performing. I mean, what would happen if you connect like that and then have a sold out crowd? You know what I mean? Like, what could happen, and what kind of impact could we have as dancers? It's just incredible. So it's exciting.
Yeah, so exciting. And I just want to say, I think for us in closing, that as we know that God is vast and amazing and grand and huge and awesome, it doesn't look the same way for every artist.
No.
It doesn't look the same duplication process of the creative or the mode or the, you know, the mechanism. I mean, it's a different, and to be expectant that it can be downloaded to one person differently than it is for another. And that just is a testament to God's uniqueness in creating and designing everyone. And then also, just as I'm hearing you articulate, and it doesn't always work in this way where we have this connection with God, and from this, there's this output of what I'm doing. Sometimes I'm just dancing in my DNA of who I've been made and designed, and I'm not putting a depth of understanding and awareness or even spiritual connection. However, it still is in existence, and it can happen that it works the other way, that it's been out there disseminated, and then either you see it start to shift, experience it, and it comes back in that power and authority. So it's just, it just is this, it's, and this is, you know.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I always talk about, you know, if we believe, you know, just in the vastness of just the universe, and that God created all of this. So we know that he's got, you know, depths to him that we don't even understand yet. And that he designed us in his image, which means that he may have created you with his unique quirk about this. And he designed me with the weird creative side in this area. And that when we all come together, then as a body, or as in, like, I love this, but as like a dancers in a group, then we're all coming together in a bigger, more redefined image of him. Does that make sense? So, like, it might look completely different for each person because God is vast and he's different. And so that's what excites me. And I always tell dancers when I'm teaching at a convention, you know, sometimes I can't say God, but I'm like, you were created differently than everyone else on this planet. Your DNA is literally different than anybody that's been or will be on this planet. And so it's like, when you dance next to this person, or you create next to this person, I'm no longer in comparison with you, because you are the only person on this planet that is you. So it is an honor to get to talk with you or dance with you or create with you, because now I'm not in comparison, because me and you will never be the same. Never. I could try it all day long, but we will never be the same. And I think that when we start really getting that knowledge, man, this will create differently. So.
And that just goes in, again, we're going to continue, but that just goes into identity, again, worth, value, what it does for us emotionally, mentally, cognitively. I mean, just what it does in that healing of all of the things that we have either been conditioned in our environments to believe about ourselves. And it just, it's so good. It's so good. Wow. Well, girl, I love you. And I am just so thankful to hear and to share you with people, and just really thankful, and just pray that this will fall on hearts and ears and souls to address their God and readdress their own purpose and worth and value. And that's the part that gets me so often too, is we just get robbed. The identity just gets stolen from us. And it's time to just stand up, confirmed and affirmed, and not to allow that to happen. And that's why we're such a force to be reckoned with together, when we can continue to agree and to speak these truths. It's so powerful.
Yeah. So good. That's so good. I'm like amped up. I'm like, what are we gonna do? Right now. Anyway.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And God bless you in all of these continued endeavors where you are in Reading, and the influence that you have there, and the role that God has placed you in this, with this mantle. They are blessed to have you there, my friend.
Thank you. Love you so much. I appreciate being on here. So
thank you.
Yeah.